A man getting bit by an alligator and he screams.
Okay, quiet. Hey, quiet.
Sit down, Sergeant.
Ow! No, not an owl. A real scream of pain.
Okay, Jason, it's day 3. It's the Oak Cliff Film Festival, the 2025 version, day 3, and this is another two-parter, another Driving While Screaming two-parter, There and Back Again, or Before and After. And to get everyone ready, I think, for the films we'll discuss tonight, we thought that this morning, early afternoon, or whatever it is, we would talk about the new Nic Cage vehicle, the Surfer. This is what, a kind of like quasi-Ozploitation type film? How would you...
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely falls within that vein of, although, like, I don't think really Ozploitation films
exist anymore?
Well, no, I'm not so much saying that, because I think there's still, like, Wolf Creek, and there's a few. I mean, that Wolf Creek I know was a good decade and change ago, but, like, I do think that they pop up here and again. Like, but what I was saying is, I don't think the Ozploitation flicks of the 70s really had much to say, and I think this is trying to.
Yes.
This is definitely trying to be a metaphor. I was reading the IMDb like reviews on this, and they're just like, there's really no like middle ground. Like everyone either is like, this is the stupidest movie, it's pointless, there's no plot, everyone's dumb. I'm like, all right, you didn't really watch the movie.
Right. I'm surprised this is that kind of divisive. So here's the, speaking of IMDb,
I think a lot of it's Nic Cage.
Yeah. Let's give the sort of synopsis or the log line. A man returns to the idyllic beach of his childhood to surf with his son. When he is humiliated by a group of locals, the man is drawn into a conflict that keeps rising and pushes him to his breaking point.
Oh, okay. On the surface, that's true. Yes.
Well, right, but that is like, that's what that is. That is just the surface, like you were saying. Then when you start to dig deeper, this opens up into, I think, not just a metaphor, but like several different ones.
Right. I think you can peel back this onion in a lot of different ways, and continue to keep pulling back layers and layers of this, because there is obviously a level of like toxic masculinity to this. There's a level of like white guilt, but also white privilege.
But also the idea of gentrification and like NIMBYism as well.
Right.
And all of these things are like butting up against each other. There's also, I think, and you mentioned toxic masculinity, but I also think that there's a more kind of explicit like manosphere like conversation in this film, like the Joe Rogan kind of like, what is a man, right? Or the Jordan Peterson kind of like, what is it to be a man, and this is what a man does, right? These like idiots who are out there, espousing masculinity without understanding what any of that really means.
Right, as if it were a definitive term that had definitive
characteristics,
right,
and qualities,
that are universal.
There's one way to be a man: you eat what you hunt.
And embedded into our DNA is, basically, if you have a penis, this is what you.
This would be then an interesting conversation to have with the cave people and materialists. Right.
Well, clearly that the opening caveman in Materialist was a beta. I mean, clearly, right?
Right.
He should have been he should have been taking what was rightfully his.
Right.
Rather than giving her
dragging her by the hair to his cave to then dominate and
taking old fuzzy tits back to the. To make sure all of his kids are taken care of.
That was the standard of beauty back then.
I think that's what the name of the first name of that movie was going to be, was Fuzzy Tits.
When you saw when you saw the covers of Caveman Cosmo, that's what you had.
How to keep your cave husband happy.
You had hairy breasts.
15 different ways.
The cave woman orgasm in you.
Are my breasts hairy enough? 15 ways to keep.
Do you think there was like breast hair bleaching back there? Oh, this took a sharp turn, didn't it?
I think we should change the name of the podcast to Fuzzy Tits
I'm
too.
sure people listening going, speaking of toxic masculinity, these assholes. So this film opens with Nicolas Cage and his son driving into this kind of, driving up to a lagoon, right? Or driving up to a kind of like input where people are surfing, and he wants to surf with his son, and it turns out that he grew up on this kind of
he took his son out of school. He's going to surprise him by showing him he's going to buy this house that's childhood home of his.
Yeah, and we start to understand that there's a strained like relationship. I mean, I think immediately we get that sense that okay, he's clearly divorced from this kid's mother or whatever. Yeah, and this is not something he should be doing. But he's like really trying to kind of connect in that way that like
because he speaks to his son on the way down the dune of like, oh, yeah, Christmas Eve, you're going to be at my place, and then at Christmas, what are you guys going to do? Like, and with the inclination, like, oh, I can tag along with you at Christmas and go visit, spend time with my family, my old family. I mean, like, I do think, I think on the surface, this is clearly a wounded and broken man who is reliving the trauma of his youth, because you've come to find out that basically his father did something nefarious, that he was a good surfer, like he feels like his son is a good surfer, and that something caused them to have to leave this familiar home.
Well, his father killed himself, I guess, because I mean he's like floating in the water, at a certain point. But also, like the old man is a stand-in for his father as well, right? And also a stand-in for him and what he will ultimately will become. And I think this is where I think this movie asks a lot of the audience and expects a lot of to really kind of dig in and really kind of dive into the analysis of this, because there's so many different ways to interpret all of these, and I think all of them are probably valid to a certain extent. Well, so this is something really interesting, because then as they're walking down the dunes to go surf with their boards, this kind of meathead pops up and he's like, don't live here, don't surf here, right? I mean, this kind of this is our place, you're a tourist, and we don't want you here, and we're in charge. Now, look, I'm not condoning violence, but I immediately understand this guy's point, right? And again, not to the violent aspect, but to say who are you? Why are you coming into this place that's ours, that clearly you don't really, or we don't know your connection to, and that you maybe don't really give a shit about except to be seen here, right? Or to use something and then just leave it.
Because you feel like you can go anywhere, right? This is the white privilege aspect of it. It's I can go anywhere I want, and I should be welcomed and accepted there.
It's a classist thing too.
Because he's clearly has
he's well-to-do.
He's well-to-do, but also living beyond his means, to a certain extent. So you get that kind of trying that that's part of his internal turmoil is that he also has issues with trying to keep up with certain
the Joneses,
certain presentation of a lifestyle, but I that this idea of and I think it's really I think it's utilizing Cage, and Cage does not have an Australian accent, and everyone else does, even his son does. Which makes you think, because his son is also an embodiment of himself. Right.
There's generational representation throughout the different characters, right?
Right. But this idea that Cage is this complete outsider who feels like at first he comes on the beach and it's look, it's a public beach. I can be here. I'll respect your traditions. I won't shit on them. Right. And then, but they're still fuck you. You can't be here. We're going to butt up against this. And he still doesn't understand. And they even give him the opportunity to say, look, we understand that it's embarrassing for you. It's understanding that you got to lose face in front of your son. But if you don't do this, it's going to be painful for you.
It's going to be worse.
And I love how all of that devolves, right? As he starts to lose pieces of himself, and as he starts to transition into the old homeless man,
right,
where it's just little bits of pieces that he gives away of himself.
And these are material objects. I mean,
Right.
of course, that are objective correlatives and that represent something deeper. You know, the watch was his father's. I mean,
Yeah, the wedding ring.
the
Was
wedding
obviously-
ring, that connection that he was still wearing
Right.
that wedding ring.
And the sunglasses are more just a moment of,
Well, it's also a
of
swapping.
his wealth, right? Yes.
Yeah, and it's just because he swaps the binoculars with the.
Right. Yeah. With what would eventually
Right, so, I
become
mean, so
himself.
it is kind of like this sort of transitioning into.
But I do think, like what you brought up in regards to like the manosphere and what's going on right now with Julian McMahon's character of the savior mentality, where then in order to find another cult to become a part of, or to find yourself, he's completely lost himself. And it's this idea of like, we've stripped away these right. We've stripped away everything from these. We've stripped away all the privilege from these white men, and they found themselves now in this like very toxic enclave of masculinity that encourages this weird level of
Aggression.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
Right.
and.
Take what is yours, right? And everything is yours.
Right. And I think that's kind of where the metaphor gets muddled a little bit, maybe because the people that tell you, again, the kind of the gentrification and the assimilation and and the appropriation that Cage is trying to do by being on the beach is also held by the manosphere, right? So like that's a little bit of a muddling of the metaphor, but I still think it works. I think it works. Right?
Yeah. I mean, because I do feel like this filmmaker is not really saying that either side is correct here, right?
Right.
I don't think he's propping up the manosphere. I don't think he's saying like this is how men should act, right? I don't, right? In fact, I think he's saying like these guys are ridiculous. Because we see that like the first aggressor from the beginning, when he's confronted with danger, runs away crying.
Right. He's the first one.
And so
to
beg for his life.
Right.
So like we understand that it's all bluster and it's all, and the director thinks this is all bullshit. But I don't think he lets the Cage character off the hook either by saying like, you need to understand, right? This is not yours anymore. You have to then like readjust or kind of integrate yourself into this society or into this area, and then you have to respect what's there.
Is Cage the only person who could pull off this role?
Yeah.
I mean, like he has done something like. When the aliens come and the nukes all go off, and then the next level, the next generation of whatever our existence is uncovers these historical documents, his career is going to be the most interesting acting career, I think, of all time.
Yes.
Because of his like wild and rampant like monetary failures, and then kind of reinventing himself in a I'll do anything aspect, and then recapturing and reclaiming that. No, where not every film works, and like you have too many Prisoners of the Ghostland type things where he does that manic, crazy, yell at the screen thing, but it feels like when it works for him, it works so fucking well.
Yeah,
it's just so well done, and like he is like in this role in the hands of anything else, which I also think it also kind of hamstrings us because we've all kind of come to expect Nic Cage to be Nic Cage, right?
It's a variation on a theme almost.
Right. But I think, also think to say that Nic Cage is just Nic Caging in this is a huge disservice to what he's actually doing in this role, because I do think he gets this film, and I mean I think that like, in the hands of any other actor, I mean, I obviously somebody else could have played it, but I do think that he was the perfect person.
But the breakdown wouldn't have. I think the deterioration and the breakdown, that's where he really excels in this film.
Yeah.
Where we need someone who's kind of over the top, like Nic Cage is, but still like restrained. So he's at once over the top and restrained in this film, right?
Right.
Like at the same time. And I don't think many other people can do that. But we need that level of almost like ridiculousness when we see him start to like lose it. right? Because it makes it just makes it make sense,
And
because it's bonkers.
And if you compare this to something like Falling Down, and like Michael Douglas and Falling Down,
Yeah.
right, which has somewhat similar themes, but like in the time that Falling Down was made, like the metaphors and the points he was trying to make were so on the nose and so ludicrous. Yes, it escalates, but I don't think that film works nearly as well as this one does. And I don't think Douglas works really as well. Like Douglas is trying to work against type, where Cage is really just leaning into
right.
this. And I don't hate Falling Down necessarily. I mean, like when you compare it to something like this, I didn't think this director had this film in him.
Yeah.
Like this guy is kind of a middling, no offense, but his outputs thus far has been better than decent. Sci-fi stuff that's been like technically proficient. He's fine with his actors, but the storylines haven't been anything that's I think has really been notable. And I think this one really like took me by surprise. And I think like some of the things that he's doing visually, I think are really. I mean, like, I think the shots that are really, really interesting. The shots of like Cage up against on the dune. I think this high kind of like. I also think that this idea of like Cage feeling like he has the high ground, but still being still being like whatever. He's but not having the advantage.
Yeah.
Is a really interesting metaphor as well.
Oh yeah.
I like all of the trappings of everything that he's kind of wrapped himself in. It comes to betray him at a certain point, and they also very slowly start to ignore him.
Right.
And then obviously all of the things that are intercut where he sees his old life as all part of this breakdown, which again is part of like, it could just be a metaphor for divorce and how he's. But when the French couple comes onto the beach and they get beaten and they're driving away, the driver turns into his wife essentially, which
right.
we don't really know that, but we assume that that's who that is.
There is, I think, the ending of this film does, I think, bring into question the reality of the situation.
Yeah.
Like, is Cage actually the old man?
Right. Because the old man at the end is dressed in a suit, right?
Right. I mean, the parallels between like how they share similar experiences, starts to bleed into each other.
Right.
And so whether
he lost
it's
his son, yeah.
Right. Whether it's he sees himself like as possibly becoming the old man, or like is in danger of becoming that, or rather we're seeing like the past Nic Cage. I mean, I don't know. I don't know that it needs to be clear. It's just like a question that I think is raised at the end.
Well, I think what's really interesting about that scene. So as this movie progresses, if you've seen it, Nic Cage kind of gives himself over to the manosphere to like kind of regain the feeling of manliness, of control.
But he never really buys into it.
But he never, right. He feels like he's still above it a little bit, and still like he also has to do things that he doesn't agree with, and that kind of like go against his moral nature. And then there's an old man character who's been abused the entire time. He's homeless. He's living out of his car. He's looking for his dog, but he thinks his dog has been killed. He comes to confront the manosphere, like Julian McMahon and his kind of cult. He makes them all get on their knees and face the ocean. But I think what was really interesting about that scene is that McMahon splits his Nic Cage and his son, which I think then speaks to that all of this is that Cage is both of these characters, or all three of them actually.
Right.
He's who he is now. He is his son and he is the old man. It's just why he kind of is just trying to like reason with him, but he's also broken up by not only that manosphere, but he also mentions that this is a guy he knew from his past. So you feel like they had that's something that Cage, how he separated himself from his father, or his father separated himself and did it, took his own life.
And then we see the old man shoot himself,
right? And
then like kind of transforms into the father. Right. I
think this is like I said, I did not expect this film at all. This is one of those movies that like you can't explain in a trailer.
No.
And again, looking at the reviews on IMDb, there are a lot of people like, well, why didn't you just clean off the water fountain? I'm just like, oh my God, like really? Like if you're looking for, like this is, what part of you thought this was a cohesive plot?
I know, right.
That was going to go from A to B.
Or it was going to make sense, right?
Right. Why did he drink that water? He knew it was...
Why did he sleep in his car to begin with? I mean, don't ask. Those are the wrong questions.
No, they actually said that. It was like, why did he not have accommodation coming so far across from the United States? I'm just like, oh my God, like really, this is, how do you watch movies? Like, you should only watch things that are like are the most simple. Like, just watch Marvel movies because it's just the easiest. There's no surprises for you there. The good guys are always going to win. It's fine.
I mean, this is as much an examination of one broken man's psyche as it is anything.
Right.
And like, if you're a broken man, if you're a broken person, you're not doing things that make a lot of sense, right?
Right.
So like, I think there's a lot of forgiveness in like what this guy's doing.
And I think, I really think this is an interesting character study, and I also think it's an interesting like look at the mentality of what we call incels, and to a certain extent, I mean, like just a branch of that, right? But I mean, what we're forcing this. We're forcing. I'm not saying this correctly, but what I think the internal turmoil of what we feel these red hat MAGAs are, why they've regressed into this cult of personality, and why they, I'm not talking about Republicans. I'm talking about red hat, deep-seated far right. And all of these people that buy into this, and also all of the young men who listen to Peterson and believe all of this nonsense, that all this bullshit rhetoric from a guy who's not even an expert in what he's talking about, or fucking Joe Rogan, who is a goddamn comedian, like a mediocre comedian. And look, he's buff, he understands UFC, but this guy is not. And I think to his credit, he probably even state this, even though he like has this kind of air of, but like, why are we listening to Theo Vaughn and fucking Bert Kreischer and Joe Rogan as these modern day philosophers? They're not.
Because they're not. No.
They haven't thought through this. These are
they're
people
not curious enough to be modern day philosophers.
These are not people who spent their time, they're all their time just sitting and contemplating life's troubles. These are privileged white men who have gotten to us. I mean, and I'm not saying they didn't have to work to get to where they're at, but they were also, lucky enough, and they don't ever really espouse that about them being lucky to get to the station of where they're at. I mean, in what world did we ever predict that Rogan was going to be the Howard Stern? And like, at least in the Howard Stern era, like, Howard understood who he was. Right. He was a crass, vulgar joke man. Yeah. And who never really ever the joke was always that he was a piece of shit. Right. Right. I mean, like, regardless of whether what he encouraged, or what kind of behavior that his listeners took from him, of like boob honking and butt squeezing and he still was the guy who was like, look, why are you listening to me? I'm glad you are, because I'm making hundreds of millions of dollars, but like, you shouldn't be listening to me.
And he came under scrutiny from the outside, where these guys come under no scrutiny.
But like, Rogan came up doing fucking the second iteration of the Man Show, and
and a small part on news radio,
and Fear Factor, like Gross Out TV, and then UFC, and then all of a sudden, like, and
he's a political stalwart now. I mean, like,
and the only reason he's really notable in the comedy world before UFC happened was because he called out Carlos Mencia. Right, that was his one claim to fame. And who really, before that went viral, like, most people just knew him from, Fear Factor. Yeah. And ruining, and taking a ridiculous show and making it even more ridiculous. Yep. And I guess I kind of lost my train of thought here too. Oh, but I guess the whole thing is
on point for us.
Right. No, but my point was, I think that, like, okay, when we show a film for Women's History Month, right? Yeah. I think this would be a wildly interesting show to have if you can have that conversation of like, all right, well, can you have empathy or not? I mean, like, is it even warranted to have empathy for these people? Right. And then, but if you don't. If you abandon them, or if you abandon them is the wrong terminology too, but if you let them go to their own devices and let them, and without ever offering them a lifeline to come back to see your side, what are you actually doing? Right. And what are you actually building up here? And I think that's a conversation worth having, because I think we see these organizations struggling because we've made this dichotomy of like, you've got to be an ally and you've got to believe in everything, and we don't have to explain anything to you, which I think is a valid point. But I also think that, like, and I understand where it's tiring to have to explain everything. And then, of course, you can talk about like black rights and women's rights, and then going all the way to gay rights and trans rights, and how that pattern continues to repeat. Yeah. But I don't know how we get to a middle ground if we don't come somewhere in there. And again, I mean, again, this is me, some dumb white ass guy talking on the podcast.
But I think this is really interesting in terms of showing this film and having it hosted by a panel of women, right, and by a panel of feminists, because so Bell Hooks has a book called "Feminism is for Everybody," and this idea that feminism isn't just helping women, and we've talked about the different waves of feminism and how some feminism just help like the white women, of a certain class, and then it kind of grows and it grows and it grows, into sort of who it kind of sweeps up and who it helps. And I think that is her point, is that making changes in this system and in this society that help women is going to help you as well, even if that's just by being able to learn empathy, to be able to understand how other people like function in this world, and how you don't have to be a caveman hitting women over the head and taking what you think is yours, right? That there are ways that this kind of mindset will benefit you as well. And it's the same thing with, like you were saying, if we go into gay rights, black rights, trans rights, all of that stuff, that's going to make things better for everyone. And this is, I think, the apocryphal notion of when we do things like affirmative action, when we pass things like gay marriage, that it's like, oh, well, you're just out to like punish the white people. And it's like, no. Like, this is going to help everyone. This is the thing, right? I mean, like, when we help the sort of those in most danger, right? Or the least among us, right? To use biblical terms that the Red Hat Magas will not understand, but we'll have heard somewhere. Right. When we help the least among us, we're also helping like the most among us, right? I mean, we're creating a system that then just increases benefits for everyone. Right. And so, like, I do think this is interesting to see, like, what would a panel of feminists, self-proclaimed feminist women, think about this, and think about how to sort of approach this, and how to not fix it, because it's not their job to fix it. But how would feminism help these guys from like their perspective? So I think that's wildly interesting.
I think this movie.
I think it would be confrontational.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, but I mean, I think we'd have to explain why. Right.
Well, I mean, because again, we've sat in front of women's groups that have really no interest, and not even saying that they should, but they have no professed interest
in the conversation,
in this conversation. Right.
And I think I think it is tough for us to sort of sit here and say, well, you should want to do these things. And I'm not even saying that. I'm just saying, but I think it's because we're interested, right? Right. Because we want to. I think we want to be allies, like good allies or better allies. And two, I think we're willing to say, like, I don't know everything. And I could benefit from you telling me certain things, right? Or you wanting to have that conversation with me.
Yeah, and I think this idea that, as an ally, we've taken upon ourselves to understand, right? At least both sides of this. Of arguments that we're trying to have with one another.
Right, but I mean, there's not really both sides. There's not a misogyny is good side.
No. But there's a reason for misogyny, right?
No.
And if it is just self-serving, right? I get what you're saying. We're also driving behind a Mercedes that has a "Why So Serious" bumper sticker on it, which is fucking breaking my brain. I'm just like, I don't want to interrupt what you're saying. Why would you do that? But like, yeah, that's amazing.
Like, what the fuck, right?
Look, there are positions that are not justified. I don't believe incel activities are justified. Right. But there are reasons for them, right?
Yes.
And so, and if it's...
And we're not blaming women for those reasons.
No, of course not.
Of course not. I'm just clarifying for the Red Hat MAGA out there who, for some reason, listens to us. Right. Is going to be like, the Wilhelm boys told me this was okay.
That is not what we're saying. That's not what I'm saying.
That's all.
But I do think that, like, if you refuse to answer any questions, or if you refuse to have any sort of conversation, because, and again, I understand why you would, because a lot of those conversations aren't in good faith, right? They're coming from a place of bias that is in, where either you agree with me or you don't, or I'm not going to listen to you at all.
Right.
Right. And so that part's difficult. And I'm not, but I mean, like, I think assuming that that's where all conversations are going to happen, and again, and maybe after a certain number of them, you have to assume that. But I do think assuming that offhand it can be dangerous.
Yeah.
And I do think that at the end of the day, like, if you're not at the very least willing to meet someone and to sit down and have a open conversation with them, you can run into. I mean, obviously you can run into issues. We already have issues.
Right. Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, it's because it shouldn't fall on. And I know this is not what you're saying.
No, I agree with you here.
But it shouldn't fall on like the sort of oppressed party to tell people why they shouldn't treat them like shit, right?
Right.
And too often that's what happens.
Yes.
And I think that's been, and then that's a big barrier to changing.
Right. Which is part of our problem as a whole anyway, is that we isolate ourselves. Our government isolates us. And we don't teach empathy. In fact, we actively, hide it.
Some of us try. Some of us who have a platform, say like higher education, do try to teach empathy as much as it's possible.
And then when we and this administration continues to roll back roll back any sort of empathetic or reaching out
or protective services,
right? Even the smallest things of like renaming,
battleships
and bullshit like that. Yeah, it's just.
I mean, you're literally erasing kind of a gay icon, right?
Well, and then removing, I mean, at some point, if this continues, we'll remove and we'll have forgotten slavery. I mean, it's.
We're trying to. I mean, we're trying to erase that. We're trying to push bills through education systems that say you can't talk about these things. So we're not going to address slavery or talk about why it was important and why we should learn from it, right? We're just like, no, nothing bad happened here ever.
Right.
There were no such things as internment camps here during World War II, right? I mean,
right. And I like I said, I think I again, this would be a difficult conversation to have, but I do think watching this film and
but we're edgelords, so.
Right? Asking people to have empathy for Cage's character in this case is an interesting conversation.
Yeah.
Yes, it would be a difficult conversation, but I think it's an interesting conversation worth having.
And I think asking viewers to understand to a certain extent the Bay Boys is also a compelling conversation to have. And because, like I said, to a certain point.
Right, and I think what this film does is, I think that does really, really well, is it never forgives. Good Lord, I know that there's someone coming up on me. My Tesla is yelling at me. I think this film does a good job of like keeping that kind of, it never really forgives Cage. It never really excuses his behavior.
Right.
In fact, I think that's why Cage also works so well in this, is because of his ability to kind of manifest that pathetic breakdown. And he's so willing to go for it. Like if you look at something like Mandy, where he's breaking down and he's sitting in his tidy whities, like in a ridiculous like baseball tee. He's like screaming at the air and drinking, whatever he's drinking. Those moments, are.
He has no shame, right?
Right.
And I don't mean that in the way that we typically use it. I just think that he's willing to do whatever he thinks is going to work for, a particular part or a particular scene. And I think there's something really brave in that too.
Agreed. Yeah, 100%. So, go see The Surfer.
Yeah, it is worth your time. It's worth watching and worth having a conversation about, even if it's just in your own head, which is like what I was doing for like, after watching that. I'm just like rolling this around in my head and going like, where, because again, it's a curious thing to feel at a certain extent, or to, at a certain point, a kind of, sympathy for some of these characters.
Right.
When you're like, I really shouldn't though, but I do, and then be able to sort of justify it. Yeah. Oh, there you go. Look at that.
up here in the front row, like we're invited guests.
So, because we're important.
So we're about to go in, kids.
Yeah, and we'll be back to holler at you a little bit later for part 2, the drive home, after. So until then, thanks for listening.
12 hours from now.
You have been listening to Why Does the Wilhelm Scream with your hosts, Brock and Jason. If you liked today's episode, do us a favor and rate, review, and subscribe in whatever application you use to consume podcasts these days. You can reach us by visiting whydoesthewilhelmscream.com. If you are in the DFW area, we would love to see you at a Fort Worth Film Club event. You can learn more about those and find a full schedule at fortworthfilmclub.com. And you can learn about my foundation and how we are trying to foster the next generation of film lovers at realhousefoundation.org. That's REEL housefoundation.org. Till next time.